Hello people of the internet, this is Kaiju Noir here with a review for Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, which is the follow-up to the 2013 superhero film Man of Steel. And now, ever since that film came out, there's been a lot of discussion and controversy and differing opinions on the quality of the film. And it took me a while to try to formulate my thoughts on the film, looking back on it now. I've been also listening to a lot of different opinions, understanding why people like it and why other people don't, and why other people are just very mixed on it. And I'm pretty much in that category. This film, to put it simply, is a beautiful mess. And it's funny that I should say that because I am someone who is often fascinated by gigantic failures, movies that have so many ideas, that have so much potential, and yet fail in the most spectacular of ways. The biggest one that comes to mind is the Frank Miller film, 2008 Frank Miller film, The Spirit, where it just had this really awesome art style. It had a really interesting premise based on an older character, and yet it's just batshit insane. And speaking of batshit, that is certainly the case with Batman v Superman. And it's really interesting how 3 years since Man of Steel has come out, we've had also have pretty much the exact same reaction, although it's much the negativity towards Batman v Superman, or BVS as I will be referring to it. It's a lot more intense than Man of Steel. I think for the most part, people kind of consider Man of Steel to be a good movie. I know I praised it way back when I reviewed it with my friend Pete, although, funny enough, I haven't seen Man of Steel since I first reviewed it way back when, and I think, looking back on it now and looking at other people's reviews of it, especially Captain Logan's Superhero Rewind on it, the film certainly has major problems. And I was pretty much surprised when this film was first announced, when there were reports that Wonder Woman was in the movie, and then it was called Dawn of Justice, and people were already going to go, oh, it's a lot of setup for a movie, you're obviously trying to rush. And for the most part, the movie is a big attempt at trying to draw audiences in with the inclusion of Batman, who kind of takes up the majority of the story in this film, as well as predicting that, yes, this is a good portion of this movie is set up for the Justice League movie that will eventually come in the near future. Also, I do want to say that one of my biggest critiques, my biggest issues that I had with Avengers Age of Ultron was that many points in the film, the plot would be sidetracked as the writers would try to introduce elements that had nothing to do with the plot, really. They were just there to set up Marvel Phase 3 films, such as Captain America Civil War and Thor Ragnarok. And those issues, even though they were a big problem of Age of Ultron, the entire movie itself worked for the most part as its own standalone story. Meanwhile, with BVS, we've had that issue and stretch it out into a 2.5-hour movie, and that's basically the gist of BVS. Now, basically, the basic story to Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice is that we start right off with the ending of Man of Steel, only we see it from Bruce Wayne's perspective, as he notices Superman and Zod fighting in the middle of Metropolis and causing many of Bruce Wayne's close friends/employees to die in the process, either die or be critically injured. Since then, Batman has grown this hatred towards Superman. He has become a lot more jaded, a lot more grim. His kind of morality, his moral center has been shattered to a disturbing degree. Meanwhile, we have Superman, who is still trying to find his place in the world, even though that was the whole point of Man of Steel. As Clark Kent, he finds Batman's more brutal methods of taking down criminals to be, well, pretty much insane. So we have Superman who doesn't like Batman doesn't like Superman, and so eventually this leads to a confrontation roughly an hour or so into the film. Now, that should be what the film is about. After all, the movie's called Batman v Superman. However, we've got a lot of different subplots introduced in the film. It's also like The Amazing Spider-Man 2, where there are a lot of different subplots that don't mesh together very well. And so we just have a mess of different characters trying to do different things, and meanwhile, there's no real explanation as to why we should care about what's going on. For instance, we have the Kentucky senator who was against Superman's actions, and she wants Superman to answer to some form of authority in the world. We have the employee of Bruce Wayne by the name of Wally, and no, he has nothing to do with the Flash, but despite the name. And he lost his legs in the destruction of Metropolis 3 years earlier. And so he has this vendetta against Superman. We have Lois Lane, who is trying to uncover some conspiracy against Superman. We have Lex Luthor, who is trying to be the puppet master and trying to be this sort of mastermind behind the conspiracy against Superman. And finally, we have all the stuff with Wonder Woman and the rest of the future Justice League members. The movie's just all over the place when really this film should have just centered on the conflict with Batman and Superman. In fact, for the first 40 minutes, my experience with the film was going pretty well for the most part. It wasn't until it was nearing the eventual clash between the two superheroes that I said to myself, oh, okay, it looks like everything's leading up to this interesting climax. How much time has passed? Wait, you're kidding. There's an hour of the movie left? And at that point, the whole conflict between Batman and Superman is resolved in the most stupidest way possible. And then we get into our Dawn of Justice portion of the film, where we, as you've seen in the trailers, we have Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman teaming up against Doomsday, who I was pretty surprised at how accurate he was. I mean, in the comics, Doomsday was just basically an alien Hulk-like monster with the ability to grow stronger from every fight he previously had. Basically, he cannot die. Whenever he dies, he comes back stronger than ever. And that's basically the case here. I mean, sure, yeah, he's still just a generic monster for the three superheroes to fight in the end, but I was at least impressed that they were able to keep that gimmick of him growing stronger with every devastating attack he receives. I guess the first subplot I wanted to tackle was the whole conspiracy against Superman, where Superman, he saves Lois in a foreign country, and a lot of people die mysteriously because Lex Luthor sent some secret agents to murder them, and everyone thinks Superman killed those people, which is stupid because they should have known, okay, these people were killed with bullets. Superman does not use bullets, so Lois Lane, she finds one of these bullets and is trying to find the origin of said bullet, and that's basically her whole purpose in the film, is to discover this conspiracy against her, which leads her to Lex Luthor. Only Lex Luthor just grabs Lois Lane when he needs her as bait for Superman. So her finding out the connection between the bullet and Lex Luthor means jack shit in the grand scheme of things. The movie really has nothing for Lois to do other than to act as the kind of moral center for Superman. She's trying to serve as Superman's moral compass along with Superman's mom. Now, even still, with the whole Lex Luthor trying to make people hate Superman, the whole plan just feels incredibly sloppy. Again, bullets. Superman doesn't use bullets. Why are you trying to make it look like Superman killed people? There was a later attempt at trying to get trying to frame Superman into killing people, but again, that goes nowhere. And so, you have Lex Luthor, he's trying to do this conspiracy thing, he's trying to get Superman and Batman to fight, and he's trying to have his final boss be created as a last resort. Meanwhile, we have no idea what his endgame is. We don't know what his motivation is for killing Superman. I mean, it's not like Batman where he's afraid that Superman's gonna conquer the human race. I mean, Lex Luthor, he clearly doesn't give a damn about the human race or about humanity or anything like that. Whenever he tries to explain his ideals, he just speaks in metaphor, saying, no, something about gods and devils and monsters. And that's the thing. Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor, bad choice. I mean, it's different, but it's different in a bad way, where it's like, I can appreciate you trying to do something new, trying to take an established character and try to pull this character off in a different and unique way. I guess you can say that about the Gene Hackman Lex Luthor, who was a bit of an eccentric realtor, as opposed to a mad scientist or an evil businessman that we eventually got in the comics and animated series. This Lex Luthor, he's just some bratty teen scientist, and he's not threatening in any way. I mean, to quote, to bring up what Zanzibar thought about this version of Lex Luthor, is that you can just feel sorry for the actor as he's trying to put this very socially awkward, jittery, Jim Carrey-esque performance. I feel nothing but embarrassment for the guy. I'm thinking, oh my god, what are you doing? Please stop. You're only making a fool out of yourself, that the internet is not gonna let you live it down for the next couple of years. But yeah, Lex Luthor, he did not work as a villain for me. Now, as for the Justice League side of things, because I would just want to get that out of the way, I really liked Wonder Woman. She was probably the best superhero in this film. I mean, I thought a lot of people say that Wonder Woman kind of comes out of nowhere. I don't really think so. I thought how she was built up until the very end was handled as decently as this script could have done. I liked the actress Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman. I thought that she was convincing as this very strong Amazonian warrior. But everything involving Justice League was just handled poorly. How Flash, Aquaman, and Cyborg were revealed in this movie was so cheap and lazy and nonsensical. I mean, I don't want to get into spoilers here, because I can say that for the spoiler review that I did with Zanzibar, Gorazard, and Super DM64 on the latest episode of the Sons of Sarazawa podcast. But yeah, it's incredibly stupid. It feels like an afterthought, really. And there's this moment where one of those superheroes makes a cameo in the film, but the cameo makes no goddamn sense, because he exists it's sort of like a hallucination / dream within a dream, Inception sort of thing involving Batman. Basically, if you've seen the trailers, you've noticed that certain sequences where Batman's in the desert. Yeah, that's all a dream sequence, but it's like a really weird, nonsensical dream sequence / vision of the future. It really goes to show how these people have no idea what they're doing when it comes to setting up future events or trying to foreshadow. Yeah, they have no idea how to handle foreshadowing. I mean, they completely botched up the whole Justice League thing. So trying to add this whole dream sequence / future vision is just another example of this. Now, as for the characters that this film is named after, Superman and Batman. Superman, again, to bring up what one of my friends said in our spoiler review, Superman, he's at least consistent with how he was portrayed in the first film, only because they don't really give him a lot to do in this film. Henry Cavill does a decent job with what little he's given, but once again, he's just someone who's trying to find his place in the world. He's trying to find his purpose, why he was placed on Earth. You see him trying to save people, which brings me to another complaint, is that you have Batman and his coworker and that one senator. They all do not like Superman for basically the same reason. They think he's too dangerous to be running around loose in the world. And yet, and I figured, yeah, they make absolute sense, especially after the events of Man of Steel. And yet, looking at this film, there's already a lot of support for Superman. Apparently there's this status quo that was made in the roughly 18 months between Man of Steel and the events of BVS. And I'm thinking to myself, why are there so many people that are completely devoted to Superman and his cause? Wouldn't it make sense to have everyone be upset over Superman, at Superman over the destruction of Metropolis? I mean, even then, that sort of dramatic shift in the status quo was also hinted at the end of Man of Steel, where 1 minute Superman snaps Zod's neck, and he is suffering through a lot of emotional turmoil over that. And then we cut to several months later where Superman's all happy and chipper and making jokes at the military for trying to track him down. It's just incredibly jarring to see this weird status quo that I feel is undeserved for this Superman. On top of that, we have this version of Superman / Clark Kent who comes off as a complete dick towards Batman, where basically, as Clark Kent, he doesn't agree with how Batman has been handling things over in Gotham. And I'm thinking to myself, you're kind of a hypocrite, Superman. I mean, you hate Batman for basically giving these criminals a death sentence, which I'll get into later. Yet you're not one to talk, Superman. After all, at the beginning of the movie, we see you just smashing a dude through 2 walls. I don't care what anyone says, that dude is dead. So you complain about Batman sort of becoming an executioner and taking the law into his own hands, and yet you're pretty much doing the same thing. I mean, that's kind of what's interesting whenever you have a story where Batman and Superman confront each other, because they're supposed to have very different ideals. They have different approaches towards handling crime. Yet, when you look at this film, Superman and Batman have basically the exact same method of approaching crime, which just makes Superman and Batman come off as hypocrites when they don't like each other. The only difference is that Batman, he's afraid of Superman because, well, his reason for hating Superman is a lot more deserved, considering how Superman was responsible for the destruction of an entire city. I really enjoyed Ben Affleck as Batman. When it was first announced that Ben Affleck was casted as the Dark Knight, a lot of people were afraid that he was going to ruin the movie. Yet, ironically enough, Ben Affleck was the least of this film's problem, and in fact, he turned out to be one of the best things about this film. They took a really interesting direction with this version of Batman, where, as I mentioned before, this is a Batman who has been fighting crime for roughly 20 years, and he's kind of lost faith in his old moral code, where now he's trying to brand criminals with a bat symbol burning a bat symbol on their body, and that would lead to them getting their asses kicked to death in prison. And so this is a much more brutal Batman. This is a Batman who really doesn't give a fuck when it comes to not killing people. I mean, you see him in the Batmobile, and he's basically like using cables to like swing cars or using them into each other and exploding, or having his Batplane just launch missiles and again blowing up people, villains. This is a guy who, it's really interesting. They don't show him directly killing people, and yet you would see his vehicles causing explosions near people where you're like, okay, those guys are dead. Or you would see him brutally smashing dudes into walls or into the ground. You're like, that guy he just broke his spine right there. Even then, he's still really cool. And a lot of people are upset with the idea of Batman killing. And it is true that having Batman kill takes away a major portion of what makes Batman Batman, in that the majority of depictions of the Dark Knight, you would have this individual who refuses to cross that line because he feels that if he does, they would make him no better than the villains that he constantly puts in jail or in Arkham Asylum. That is heavily emphasized in a lot of the best stories about Batman. Yet, having a Batman that does kill, it at least provides an interesting character arc. We have this Batman who's kind of lost his way. He's consumed by hate, anger, and rage. As Jeremy Irons, Alfred points out, by the way, Jeremy Irons was great as Alfred. It kind of serves into this idea of like Superman kind of, in the end, trying to serve as this symbol of hope, which is a theme that's carried over from the last film. And Batman kind of realizing that hope and kind of has this like self-realization that he needs to better himself. So at least the whole brutal Batman angle plays into the plot. I just wish that it wasn't bogged down by so many other subplots that don't go anywhere. I mean, now that I think about it, this film is a lot like Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla, where you have a bunch of interesting ideas that don't go anywhere because they're constantly crashing into each other. Also, I'm the kind of person who wasn't bothered by Michael Keaton's Batman killing people or mowing down people with his Batmobile, or attempting to kill the Joker with his Batwing. And also, even The Dark Knight, the whole not killing people played a major part in his character. he definitely killed some people throughout the Dark Knight trilogy, be it the burning down the League of Assassins headquarters and possibly burning some of their members to death, or killing Harvey Dent / Two-Face, or using the tumbler to cause a bunch of police cars and villain trucks to crash into each other or crash into the Gotham Bay. So yeah, basically every live-action incarnation of Batman has killed to some degree. I mean, it's not a good thing, but it's not a proper excuse, but yeah, for me personally, I don't have a problem with, the idea of Batman killing in previous films, so it doesn't bother me as much as it does for other people when it comes to BVS. And I guess the last thing I wanted to talk about was the action. That was basically the saving grace of this whole film. And that's a sad thing because this film wants to take itself so seriously with its very dark and gritty and joyless atmosphere where pretty much everyone is suffering to some degree. This film wants to be more than just a big dumb action movie. And yet, ironically, the only way to enjoy this film is to view it as a big, dumb action movie. And that's how I was managed to stay on board with this film. Like I said, I enjoyed a lot of the action, especially on the part of Batman. We have a Batman who can finally have a proper fight with his opponents. Previous incarnations of the Caped Crusader, he was constantly restricted by the stiff, rubbery bat armor, be it the Michael Keaton suit, where the 80s and 90s Batman movies, where he couldn't even move his own neck. Even though the Dark Knight movies try to do their best with having a more agile Batman, he kind of comes off as more of a drunken boxer than anything else, than a professional martial artist. And here we have a Batman who kicks all kinds of ass. Like I said, I love Ben Affleck's depiction of Batman. I also love the suit. It's probably the best looking suit out of all the live action Batman movies. Although I still have a soft spot for the Michael Keaton suits, only because I think black and yellow work fantastically with one another as a color scheme. And even then, the fight between Batman and Superman was amazing, and I loved all the references to The Dark Knight Returns, which is a book that this movie draws heavy inspiration from in terms of its visuals and kind of the basic setup. Although what really bothers me is that, despite the fact that Batman and Superman had a good reason for fighting each other in the comic, and despite that comic being the biggest inspiration for this film's plot, the reason why Batman and Superman eventually fight each other was so weak that this entire fight that half the film was building up towards, the fight could have been completely avoided. And like I said, the way the fight ends is utterly stupid. But luckily the film manages to redeem itself by having Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman teaming up against Doomsday. I mean, there's that, I guess maybe it's the inner geek in me, the inner comic book geek, who grew up with these characters throughout the 90s and early 2000s, and eventually grew to love these characters as I learned more about their backstories and watched other adaptations of these characters. There was just that sense of joy of seeing all three fictional characters together and on screen in live action for the very first time. You've got the trinity of superheroes, three of the most iconic superheroes in existence together for the first time. I mean, it just, I had that. It was a very self-satisfying moment to see that all happen on screen, and I feel like the characters at that point started to act like the characters that I was expecting them to act like during this whole mess of a film. The ending itself is very bombastic. It's really over the top, and it reminded me of one last thing I want to comment on. It's that apparently the writers behind Batman v Superman, they really must have noticed all the flack they got from the ending of Man of Steel, where everyone was complaining that, Superman, he's acting irresponsibly because he's just he and Zod are just throwing each other into buildings and causing a ridiculous amount of people to die. And in this film, every time there was a big battle, the characters clearly state, thank God this is an empty area, or don't worry, there's nobody here in this area. I mean, they even got Anderson Cooper, a real-life American anchor, to actually have a cameo and say, we have Superman who's fighting a mysterious monster in the middle of Metropolis. Luckily, it's a weekend, so there's nobody in this area. Or you would have Batman who would try to lure Doomsday into the Gotham Harbor, and Wonder Woman's like, what are you doing? Why did you bring him here? And Batman's like, don't worry, I made sure that the place was deserted. So it's like, it's kind of a cheap way, but it's like they kind of went to the extreme opposite, where it's like, before you had Superman who's just killing people, accidentally killing people left and right. Now you have these writers who are trying to make it so obvious, saying, look, there's nobody dying, nobody's getting hurt, see, we paid attention to you guys. It just seemed incredibly obvious to have these people just go out of their way to say that there's nobody in the area that these superheroes and this one monster are destroying. So anyways, despite the fact that I have major criticisms against the movie, at the end of the day, I don't hate it. I still enjoy it to a certain degree. Watching this film was a lot like my experience last year with watching Terminator Genisys, in that after listening to so many negative reviews of the film, I kind of went in with the lowest expectations, only to find that the movie wasn't as bad as I thought it was. Where it's like, it wasn't a complete train wreck. And like I said, the film is a beautiful mess. Even though the story had a lot of issues, it had interesting ideas. It certainly had a lot of talent behind it. The actors in this film were great. The visuals were astounding. The fights themselves were big, large, and were a lot of fun to see. And like I said, I enjoyed this movie just as a big, dumb action movie. And I know this movie wants to be so much more than that, but unfortunately, that's the case here, because nothing else works with this film. So this would be a movie that I'd say I would recommend checking it out at least once in your lifetime. I mean, even if you don't like the movie at the end of the day, at least you can say, wow, that's quite possibly the biggest, most astounding mess I've ever seen. And to that should also be worth watching. You can watch it for the visuals, watch it for the fight, watch it for some of the character portrayals, or you can watch it for the sake of watching one of the biggest messes ever committed to cinema. So at the end of the day, I'm going to give this film a 3 out of 5. I came out of BVS feeling more positive than negative. And so that's, overall, I was left satisfied for the most part with this film. Now, that's not to say that I'm excited for Justice League in any way, other than to see how big of a failure that movie will be. But I will say I am really excited for the Wonder Woman spin-off film, if one ever comes out. Because looking at the performance of this film, it looks like it's about to top Ang Lee's Hulk as having one of the biggest, shifts in box office performances. I mean, the movie did really exceptionally well in its first weekend, but then again, the movie was released worldwide on the same day, so that's kind of raises an eyebrow there. It got $500 million on its first weekend, but then for its second weekend, it had this staggering drop of 80%, and so I can only imagine what's going to happen now that word of mouth has spread on the on the quality of the film. But yeah, this movie's existence was influenced by the negative reaction towards Man of Steel. So now I'm curious as to what's going to happen to the future of the DC cinematic universe now that we've had all this controversy surrounding this film. Either way, it's going to be an interesting couple of years as we see Warner Brothers try to handle this mess again. So anyways, those have been my thoughts on Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. I hope you've enjoyed it, and please let me know in the comments below, what did you think of BVS? I'm interested to hear your thoughts. So until next time, everybody, take care.